So, ready?
Sure.
Okay, well, I guess we can just start by saying that today we're going to be speaking a little bit about the new recording coming out from Métier, which is called Voix Voilée, Spectral Music for Piano, which features music by Joshua Feinberg, his complete piano works, and Hugues Dufour's Erlkönig. So Andrew's just going to ask me a few questions about it today.
Great. So I just wanted to know, how did you first become involved with spectral music?
I've been involved with playing spectral music for about a decade. About 10 years ago, an ensemble that I was directing in New York, Ensemble 21, was asked by the Guggenheim Museum, I'll try saying this again, was asked by the Guggenheim Museum to give a concert featuring contemporary French music. And we were one of the first ensembles in America to perform the music of the Spectral School. Our concert featured music of Gérard Griset, Tristan Murail, Philippe Leroux, and Philippe Hurel. And for me, this was just a tremendous experience to play this music, which seemed to use the piano in such a sophisticated and sensitive way. In particular, I was really drawn to the music of Tristan Murail. On that program, I played a solo piece of his called La Mandragore, and also chamber work called La Barque Mystique. And I was so taken with his writing that I approached him to write a piece for me, which a few years later became what I consider really a masterwork for piano, Les Travaux et les Jours. And I recorded his complete piano music also for Métier a few years later. So this was kind of the beginning of a very intense affair with spectral music. So I was thrilled when I was asked a few years ago by Métier if I would want to do a follow-up to this recording. And for that, the choice seemed really obvious, to do music of Joshua Feinberg, who's really the main American proponent of spectral music, and Hugues Dufour, who is a member of the first generation. And Dufour is often referred to as the composer who coined the term musique spectrale in 1979. He was an original member of the Ensemble Itinéraire, which included Murail and Griset, but he's also a musicologist, a composer, a philosopher, a theorist. And what's exciting about Dufour is, even though he is older, he continues to write piano music, and lots of it, in even just the past 5 years. So it seemed a great pairing, a young second generation spectral composer, Feinberg, who's written so much for piano, and then to feature one really great work by an older member of the movement. And I should add that on the recording, the world premiere recording of several of the pieces, including Dufour's Erlkönig and Feinberg's Grisaille, which was written for me.
In your own words, perhaps in a nutshell, how would you describe spectral music? Like, how does it use the piano in a very unique and fresh way?
In the 1960s, technology developed so that it was possible to use spectral analysis on acoustic sound. That is, to analyze, using the computer, sound in a visual way, so you could see the interworkings not only of frequency, which is pitch, and dynamics, or loudness and amplitude, but all the characteristics of a sound. The interaction of its harmonics, the higher pitches within the sound, the degree of noise in a sound, which differs from every instrument. On an instrument like piano, spectral analysis enables you to see the decay of the instrument and how the sound changes, the sound wave changes, and how the activities of the harmonics change over time as the sound is held. It also lets you see different ways the sound is made, different kinds of attacks on the piano keyboard. These composers in America and in France, particularly in the late 1960s, really used spectral analysis to understand how instruments work, how they resonate, and they used the information from spectral technology to begin writing in different ways for instruments, based more on how they resonate and the particular timbre or tone color aspects of the instruments themselves. So when I play music by the spectral composers for piano, I sense a real sophisticated treatment of the piano's timbre and tone color, the way the pedal is used, the way the registers are used. It's really a music that's about the kind of sound that comes from the piano. In a previous disc for Métier, I had recorded Murail's Territoire de l'Oubli, And this is a work which is really, at the time, I described it as being written for the piano and about the piano. And all of these pieces on this disc especially explore this wonderful timbral world of the instrument, which is so unique as compared to other instruments. The treatment of the piano by Feinberg, the way he uses the pedal, the way he uses harmony, or the way Dufour treats time, all of these things take into account what is really unique and fascinating about the piano timbre itself. And I really believe that you don't see this kind of sophistication and sensitivity writing for the instrument. Really, to find it, you have to go back to the late 19th century, looking at composers like Liszt, Scriabin, and even Debussy, looking at composers who were about color, who really understood intuitively the way the piano functions, how it can sound, and how it really breathes as an instrument.
I think one of the most interesting things that I found about the producing of this disc was that you actually had the composer as your producer. So how was it like working with Joshua Feinberg as a producer?
Well, I've known Joshua Feinberg a long time. I met him in the early 90s, long before I was really aware of spectral music. And right when he was going to France to work with Murail, he was a student of Tristan Murail's, and to this day remains very close to that first generation of spectral composers. He was a great producer for the disc because he understands the aesthetics so well. He's a wonderful composer and pianist himself, and he's also I feel, a tremendously demanding producer. It's a joy to come to a recording session. Ours took almost a week, and work with somebody who has such a perfectionist's vision of what the sound is about, what the textures are about in his own works and in the music of Dufour, a composer, like I said, who he knows quite well. And so we would do long takes, and he would be extremely specific, asking for very subtle changes of dynamic, of color, of attack, of timing. There might be times when we needed just to get the most ethereal pianissimo or the most tremendous quadruple fortissimo, and he would I would do what I thought was exactly what was notated on the page, and yet he would be dissatisfied with that. And that's I find very exciting as a player, because being in a session with a composer like that teaches you yourself how to rehear the music and become newly trained in playing your instrument. It's funny because when you record for a composer, your obligation changes when you are when you're playing in live concert. You're playing for the audience, and that's a different kind of performance, and there's a different kind of performance aesthetic. And when you record for a composer, your obligation is entirely different. There really is a right and a wrong way to do it when the composer's in the room. And so I think that working with him elevated the performances of his own works, and I think the Dufour as well, to a level when the performances really can be considered definitive.
Could you give us maybe a synopsis of a day in the recording process?
We had a great luxury of working at MPAC, at the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center in Troy, New York, which is a fantastic institution. We had a beautiful live kind of recording space, concert hall, and beautiful 9-foot instrument. And we usually would record for about half the day, and then the second half of the day listen to the recording, listen to the material we'd produced, and edit that. And in most of those cases, that made up a very full day, getting started, playing very hard, taking a break for lunch, and then listening and critiquing in the afternoon everything we had done. And it's quite a ambitious CD in terms of the amount of material. It's a single CD, but many pieces and many complex pieces. So our time was very full when we were there. We didn't go back. Each piece was recorded on its own day, so we didn't go back and re-record anything. And I think it's important to add that on a CD like this, we strove not to do many edits. It's not a disc where the performance is chopped up to make a clinical or pristinely perfect recording. We went for very long takes, and with the idea that we would do minimal editing, so that we created a great deal of material from which we selected long takes which we felt were representative, which were dramatic, which had the right kinds of colors and textures and sounds. But in that way, it was very different from other recordings that I think I've made, where the composers have been more willing to chop things up into smaller segments and hook them together, and doing a lot of art in the editing room. And this was really a disc where we tried to get all of that kind of magic and spontaneity in long takes, as if it were a performance.
You are both a performing and recording artist, so what would you say are some of the benefits and drawbacks of each process, recording and performance, and do you try to bring certain parts of each world into the other?
For me, recording and performing are very, very different kinds of activities, and I think this idea of responsibility or obligation, when you do a live performance, there's certain responsibilities, because especially in the case of contemporary works, you're playing it for an audience where the person might only hear the work one time. So the performance needs to be dramatic and captivating in a very immediate way, and the performance needs to be, I think, extreme and sometimes a little broader, just like stage acting needs to be quite broad and big to reach the audience and to be completely salient and make sense on a single hearing. And when you have a CD or a digital recording where people can listen to it again and again and again, the responsibility changes. There's a possibility to do much more in terms of subtlety and to take different kinds of risks in the recording studio that would be impractical to take on stage. I think I mentioned, and Feinberg's piece Lightning begins with single tones on the piano, which are just the limits of audibility, and only a very, very crazy performer will walk out on stage and sit down and risk the first note of the piece not sounding. That's just not a smart move as a player. But in a studio, you can take those risks and try to get just the barest sound in the piano, which in a concert hall would not even be heard. Or on Dufour's Erlkönig, there are parts that are just marked tremendously loud for pages upon pages of very loud, aggressive, violent playing. And in live performance, a performer needs to protect themselves. You don't really play as hard as you can for 20 minutes in front of people because you need to save yourself. Be sure you can make it to the end of the piece. But in a recording studio, you can take those kinds of chances and push your boundaries. It's a very self-indulgent setting for an artist, and that's what's great about it. Is as an artist, you get to explore things that you really can't explore in front of an audience. There's things that an audience wouldn't want to see and no one would want to hear, and those you cut up and you leave on the editing room floor. But what you get, hopefully, are sort of transcendent moments and beautiful, beautiful chance occurrences that you could not probably, moments you could not arrive at in front of a large audience. So I think there are, each situation has its own kinds of motivations for the player.
And especially for the recordings of these pieces, I remember these composers had very specific and sometimes very odd markings or directions in the score. And I know that poses many particular challenges when it comes to performing and capturing those markings, especially in a recording situation. Maybe you could share with us some of those interesting moments that I know in the Dufour there was one particular marking where he mentioned that it should be played like the drill of a dentist or something like that.
It's true. There's in Erlkönig, towards the end, when the piece is becoming very, very aggressive and very violent and very unforgiving to both, I think, the performer and very harrowing for the listener, ideally, he does indicate that it's to sound like the drill of a dentist. And I think, again, in the recording studio, when it's just between you and the piano, you and the instrument in the space, you can really explore what that means. In front of a live audience, sometimes it's scary to do something so aggressive, so revealing, or so technically punishing. And I think especially in the case of Erlkönig, it's I was able to explore extremes where really quoting physical exhaustion in playing, which as a live performer, it's not wise to do. But I think that's inspired me now in the studio and in future live performances of the piece. I will be able to bring that to my performance. I think that's also what's exciting for me as an interpreter, to have gone through this experience of making the recording, is I retaught myself how to play the pieces, and especially working with Joshua Feinberg, how to rehear them, how to rehear the dynamic scale, how to relearn to hear the timbre, how to relearn how to play the pieces. And that's something which now informs my performance practice, and when I perform the pieces for people and teach the pieces, it's something I've internalized about how they go. What's strange being a performer dedicated to new music is that the score can only tell you so much. There's only so much that the composer can write down, so the experience of living, eating, drinking, and breathing the pieces for an entire week with the composer every moment telling you thumbs up, thumbs down, good or bad, yes or no, that's a wonderful re-education in how to play and how to read music. So I think just spiritually as a player, that was a tremendously important experience.
Would you say there is a standout in the recording?
It's hard to say because the recording includes pieces like Erlkönig, which is a 30-minute piece, and then all pieces which are just short. So a tribute piece by Joshua Feinberg, Till Human Voices Wake Us, which is a tribute to the composer Dominique Ronsard, which is barely a minute and a half. So there's very, very different kinds of pieces on the disc, which are the way they are for very different reasons. And certainly any listener will gravitate towards one or the other. I think that Grisaille, the new piece by Feinberg from 2012, which he wrote for me, is really an extraordinary work, which is a way the piano is used, which I don't really think any other composer has done yet. He named the piece Grisaille because a grisaille is an underpainting. It's used by Renaissance composers, a painting that might just be a sketch almost in shades of gray and black and white that ultimately would be painted over. And his grisaille really consists of almost like a musical underpainting, a skeleton of the piece, a harmonic background, upon which then the pianist plays a whole other piece over the top. And at certain points in the piece, when the pedal comes off and one hears in the sostenuto pedal traces of this other grisaille, this musical underpainting, it's really fascinating. It's just it's as if the pianist is playing two pieces at once on the same piano, and I found that extraordinary score to get to know, and to create a kind of musical texture that I didn't know existed or could exist on my own instrument. So that was quite fantastic. It was also extremely virtuosic piece for Feinberg. I've played a lot of very virtuosic piano music of the New Complexity, or music of certain American composers associated with kind of post-serial music, which is very, very hard music, or even music of Boulez, it's kind of Darmstadt generation. But this piece, Grisaille, presented such unique kinds of physical challenges and I think psychic challenges in conceiving what it was about. And for me, I think sets a very high bar, a new standard for virtuosity, which I don't think was so much the composer's intent. I think all of that serves an extremely musical purpose. But as a player, it presented tremendous challenges, and I think for the listener, it presents a really, really different kind of musical environment to explore.
Okay, I think we have enough. Yeah.
Okay.
You're 20 minutes now, so
okay.
I think that's plenty.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right,
thanks. Hope that was okay.
That was great.